As anxiety over the coronavirus runs high, it's accompanied by another distressing trend, a rise in racism. In Bulgaria, many Roma are outraged. They've lost their jobs. They're facing tighter lockdowns than others. Their neighborhoods cordoned off. Authorities say it's vital in reining in the spread of the virus. The Roma say it's discrimination. From Asians in Europe to Muslims in India and black people in the United States, fear over the pandemic is giving a boost to xenophobia and exclusion. I'm Ben Fazulin. Welcome. Life isn't always easy in lockdown, but you don't have to make it harder for others by being racist. As our guest today points out, it could actually put you in a dangerous situation yourself. We'll get to that. First, a virus called racism.
The virus does not discriminate. It's a line many have used to describe the fact that anyone can come down with COVID-19. But when it comes to human behaviour, discrimination has reigned supreme in this pandemic. Around the world, various groups have been maligned, accused of spreading the virus. Asian Americans have reported verbal and physical abuse, fuelled, some say, by this kind of rhetoric from US President Donald Trump.
Why do you keep calling this the Chinese virus? Why do you keep using this? A lot of
Because it
people
comes
say
from
it's
China.
racist.
It's not racist at all, no, not at all. It comes from China.
The discrimination knows no borders. In China itself, African residents have faced abuse, apparently linked to a cluster of cases within the Nigerian community in the southern city of Guangzhou.
You know, when you go out, people run away from you. It's very terrible. You will be like uncomfortable to stay in that country. So every time your family is calling you, asking you about the information, how you are living here, and then how you are struggling. But there is something you cannot tell them because they will feel bad. They will start crying and then worrying about you. So there is some cases you cannot tell them how you are. You just tell them everything is okay.
There are countless other examples of pandemic-fueled racism, with the fear of suffering and helplessness in the face of a spreading virus proving a toxic cocktail.
Stephen Vertovec is director of the Max Planck Institute for the Study of Ethnic and Religious Diversity. Steve, this has even been going on in the German city of Göttingen, where you're based.
I'm afraid so. There's all sorts of prejudices that appear in everyday circumstances. One incident we heard about was some Chinese students being thrown off of a public bus.
Which isn't the nicest. I mean, you've got to get to work, you've got to get back home. I mean, you don't feel that welcome, do you? But this is something that we hear time and again throughout history, epidemics and xenophobia.
Well, that's right. Unfortunately, xenophobia, as the word means, is this fear of foreigners, a fear that they somehow threaten society, and that the threat might be in terms of people think a threat to the economy and jobs, a threat to national security in terms of crime and terrorism, a threat to national culture that has been eroded somehow. And in this case, as you're saying, through history, we've seen people thinking that foreigners represent a threat to public health.
What is the threat here, though? Because, I mean, what's the advantage of discriminating like that? What's the actual benefit of throwing an Asian kid off a bus?
Well, I would say overall there's no benefit. We're only hurting ourselves because you're thinking that you're avoiding a health issue, in this case a virus that threatens us all by isolating a particular group of people. But I suppose in people's own heads, they think that it's a protective measure. They think that they're avoiding something because they presume the foreigner is the carrier of the disease. And I'm afraid we're all carriers of the disease.
Exactly. So a German could think they're protecting themselves by getting away from an Asian person, but by mixing with other Germans, they could just as well, or even more so, be putting themselves in danger by letting their guard down, I guess. What can we do against this type of thinking?
Well, I think it's let's say people tend to categorize other people all the time, and they associate this category with particular behaviors or qualities and in this case, behaviors that they think transmit a disease. And I think one of the best things that can be done are for clear statements and information to be given by political leaders, by health authorities, by other prominent people and agencies that this is a planetary disease. It is not associated with a particular group or even category of people. Sometimes migrants and refugees get blame on the whole rather than specific groups. I think to get the message across that this is something that affects all of us, it's not associated with particular groups, and that we all have to be on our guard and do our best to prevent its spread.
So it's planetary. I guess good journalism would also help, but aren't we all born
good
racist?
Journalism, I'm afraid, sorry, Ben, I'm afraid we see amongst journalists and the media sometimes these stereotypes being perpetuated. When we see a story about the pandemic and a photo of a Chinese person, that is not helping our stereotyping.
Sure, I think that's something we all have to think about here as well, what sort of footage we put out there and how we word things.
Right.
It's something you have to be careful with, especially considering what I wanted to get to. We're all born racist to a certain extent, aren't we? It's an instinct, but I guess we don't have to be animals.
Well, I wouldn't want to say that we're all born racist. We're all born, it's part of the way that our brain engages the world, that we categorize. And this is what we teach our children to do, to categorize plants versus animals, elephants versus zebras or whatever. It's how we make sense of the world is through categories. And this extends to society as well. We are constantly categorizing types of people, groups of people, and so forth. But I think what's misplaced is when a category of people, an ethnic group, a race, a religion, that we assumed that everyone in that category has the same values, beliefs, practices, attitudes, and so forth, which is simply not the case. And this is where a natural categorization overlaps into stereotyping and racism. So I would say, yes, we all naturally categorize, but we don't all have to be racist.
Steven Verdovec, Director of the Max Planck Institute for the Study of Ethnic and Religious Diversity. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ben.
Well, it's that part of the show when you get to ask the questions. Derek Williams is our science correspondent. Here he is with the queries you guys sent us.
If someone were vaccinated against COVID-19, could they still carry the pathogen and transmit it to others who haven't been vaccinated?
Well, this is something that we'll only know when we actually have a vaccine. So this question involves quite a bit of speculation. The hope is no, that vaccinated people won't be able to transmit the virus anymore. In simplified terms, the way that diseases like COVID-19 spread is by turning your cells into factories for churning out many more copies of the virus. And it takes time to really get those factories up and running on a scale that's large enough that you begin to shed the virus in significant amounts and start infecting other people. If your immune system has been primed by a vaccine to recognize SARS-CoV-2, it should stomp down on any subsequent infections with it quickly before the virus is able to start churning out a lot of copies of itself. Then, as more and more people stop passing COVID-19 to others because they no longer get it themselves, we'll eventually reach what's called herd immunity. At least that's the theory. So we'll have to wait and see whether that theory holds true when we actually have a vaccine.
I know the virus can enter the body through the mouth, eyes, and nose, but can it also enter through wounds or cuts?
It can't be ruled out completely, but there's no data or evidence out there to support the idea of bloodborne transmission. To invade the body, we're pretty certain that SARS-CoV-2 has to latch onto a particular receptor called ACE2 that's found in the cells in the upper respiratory tract, as well as in the lungs, the arteries, the kidneys, the heart, and the gut. In cells that don't have ACE2 receptors, like those in your skin and your subcutaneous tissue, the virus simply has no way to get in. So at least in theory, even if SARS-CoV-2 got into an open scratch, say on your finger, it wouldn't be able to infect you that way, but it might if you use that finger to rub your eye.
I've heard about studies involving the BCG vaccine. Are there any indications it could provide protection against COVID-19?
The BCG vaccine is a vaccine against tuberculosis that's been around for around 100 years, and it's still used widely in places where TB is endemic. It isn't really terrifically great at preventing TB, but it does seem to have some non-specific effects on the immune system as a whole. The reason some researchers think it might provide some protection against COVID-19 is that they noticed what they say could be a correlation. So 2 big studies are now going on to see whether or not BCG vaccine really can help prevent COVID-19. And as soon as they're published, I'll let you know here.
And before we go, a love story amid the pandemic in Düsseldorf, Germany. Rather than cancelling the wedding, this bride and her groom threw a socially distanced ceremony in a drive-in cinema. The guests followed from their parked cars. Car horns instead of wedding bells. Not the most romantic, but I guess someone was in a rush with a bun in the oven, I guess. Congratulations to the newlyweds, Janina and Philipp Scholz.